Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Morning, everyone. So, welcome to Points of View. We're back. Carl, Tajinder, myself. We got a new voice this week, which is Lucy, which is always exciting. Welcome, Lucy.
Hello there.
Cool. How are you, Carl? Tajinder?
I'm good, thank you, Dave.
Tajinder, you're good?
Very croaky voice.
She's struggling a bit this morning, so we'll go straight into it. I think we got two really interesting points of view to discuss this week. The first one, I'm picking up from Bridget Phillipson, a speech she gave on Thursday, linked into a lot of discussions obviously going on in the country about adolescence. I got to say, I still haven't seen the show, so I can't really comment on that. But she said that we need more male teachers so British boys have role models. And just to give you a bit more of the quote, fate of boys is a defining issue of our time, called for more men to become teachers to combat, and I'll give the quote here, toxic, so that's a quote from herself, behaviours. So maybe Lucy, seeing it's your first time, do you want to go first? What are your thoughts on this?
I can do, yeah. So, I mean, we need good teachers. We do need male teachers. They're really underrepresented in primary schools, but I would hate to see a situation where a really good female teacher was overlooked for the sake of putting a male teacher in place. However, having said that, when I think about the teachers that I had male teachers and female teachers at secondary school, not at primary school, but I don't remember them as being male and female teachers. They were just teachers I liked and teachers that I didn't like so much. And so I understand I had, my dad at home, so I had that male role model, and I do think that's really important. But of course, we've got sports coaches, we've got people that lead different clubs, we've got, famous people. Obviously, that's not always a good thing if they pick the wrong role models. But there's a lot to be said for what happens in the home in terms of, what people are watching at home, whether parents are keeping on top of those things, steering them away from those unsuitable role models. So overall, yes, it would be good to have more male teachers. Secondary school is very well represented. And in fact, senior leadership is often overrepresented when it comes to the male teachers. And so that could be addressed as well. But I agree largely with the premise, but I wouldn't like to see, an entire focus on employing men for the sake of employing male teachers.
Carl or Tajinder, you want to jump in?
I do actually. I agree with you, Lucy, completely. I think this is them coming back at a situation. Sorry for my voice. Coming back at a situation and trying to make schools do the job that family should do. So, like, they failed in terms of family policy, and they won't accept they failed. So what they will do instead is go, right, schools, you do it. You bring in more male teachers, but in the end, your job as a teacher, regardless of whether you're male or female, is not to be male or female, is to be a teacher, right? So what are we actually going to do to get those fathers to actually take some time and look after their own children, regardless of whether you're in a family situation or not? And I say this as someone who's divorced, so I'm not saying that all families should stick together. But what we should do is, if we're going to do all this RSE stuff that we already do, why is part of that not telling boys, if you abandon your children, if you do not look after them, if you don't go and see them once in a while, this is what's going to happen? Because the outcomes for boys compared to girls when a father leaves the home is huge. Like, it's not the same at all. Boys go through a much worse situation.
Carl?
It's a really interesting one, I think, because if you look at the trends over time, so if you tend to look at cycles of 30 or 40 years, what you can find certainly in the UK, but I think that's replicated in most developed countries, is that in the 1970s, there was a much greater balance between men and women. So, yes, it's true that particularly in primary and most overwhelmingly in the nursery sector, women have always been in greater numbers. The proportion to which they were in greater numbers in the 1970s was less than it is now. So what's been going on over the last 30, 40 years is one of the questions that we need to answer. And I think another interesting thing that we need to bear in mind here is, to use an economic term, the extent of wage elasticity in regard to the general cost of living. And the reason why I raise this is because there seems to be different behaviour when we see men's decision making on whether to join the workforce and remain in a particular job compared to women. If I can just explain, it seems that men in teaching, but men generally, and this is for no reason that, good or bad, it just seems to be observable. Men generally are much more likely to be responsive to or sensitive to the relative wage in a profession. Now, it doesn't take us long to realise that there's been a significant erosion in the relative pay of teaching compared to other professions, other graduate professions, since, well, definitely since the 1970s, but actually over the last 20 years, a significant erosion. So it's not really, when you look at that surprising that there are fewer men in teaching, because if men are much more likely to opt for a profession because of its salary and stay in it because of its salary than women, and the pay differential between teaching and other graduate professions has widened to such a degree, it's not therefore surprising that there are fewer men in teaching. Now, that's not to say that there aren't, and I'm sure there are some societal factors here involved. And the trouble is, with the societal factors, it's quite difficult for us to control those, because they're related to broader trends and broader issues which we only have very limited influence over in education. But what we do have is the power to pay, well, through government's willingness, the power to pay teachers more money. And if the pay differentials were restored, all the evidence suggests that there would naturally be more men and more women in trying to get into the profession and stay in the profession. Because the other thing, I'll finish, Dave.
Sorry, Carl, you are literally evading the issue. And the issue is, why don't fathers themselves, who actually produce those children, actually take care of them? You're just evading the issue because it doesn't suit you. You're doing the exact thing that I'm saying, which is, you in the Labour Party will literally evade the fact that you've produced rubbish family policy for decades. And you, sorry. And then you go back into, schools are doing this. It's got nothing to do with schools.
But I do think, Linda,
to do with home.
Just to come in on that, I mean, we're talking about teachers, we're talking about things we can control. I mean, to be fair on Carl, I don't think Carl or I.
No, but Dave, we've got to go back to government and say, no, you don't turn around to us and say we must have more male teachers in a classroom for the sake of it, like Lucy said, because that won't
role models.
Will make a difference. Is your family policy to sort your family policy out. But because people like Carl, who have been part of the Labour Party for so long, cannot control themselves, cannot have any conscience about the fact they got things wrong, we have to then go back into teaching and what we do and pay and conditions. It won't make a difference. Family policy will.
I think to defend Carl, I don't think Carl's responsible for a long-term decline in sort of issues that I think are responsible for society and all governments.
Right, so if he's going to do that, if he's going to go down that route and then turn around and sit here and go, it's to do with economic elasticity, to hell with that, quite frankly. It's to do with family policy, which you failed at repeatedly.
I think my point is, I do think there is an issue, particularly when I'm looking at the numbers. Now I've lost it for a second, but there is just here we are. We're talking about a severe lack of teachers it comes about more in early education. So we've got very few numbers of male teachers in primary school. If you go down to nursery and early education, it's incredibly one in seven in nursery and primary, 1 in 33 in early years.
Why is that, Dave? Because you scared them off in the first place, right? So when I first started becoming a teacher, it was basically if you chose to be a teacher in primary, and you're a male teacher, you were scared of all the stuff that might come around it, right?
Yeah.
So we were scared. Don't forget there was no touch policies in primaries. No touch policies in a primary school. Are you mad? Are you mad? Right? These are young children, and they will come and give you a hug. They'll want to sit on your lap if they're really young. Like, so many male teachers like, no, we don't want to do it because we don't want to be accused of doing something that we haven't done. For a
So,
start,
Jinder, can I answer the
you
point?
can.
Is that all right?
You can make a reasonable point, Carl,
Yeah,
and not down the party line. Can you make a point that is from your conscience and not from the party line?
First of all, to Jinder, I don't speak for the Labour Party. I've got nothing to do with what they do. So I just wanted to make that point on a personal level. But
you are
leave that to one side now. Leave that to one side. It's incidental. I actually agree with quite a few of the points that you make in terms of the wider social issues. And there has been an increase for reasons that you can understand, but there's been an increase in general awareness and concern about the the problems of, for example, child abuse and safeguarding issues, and those things are far more prominent in public discourse now than they were in the 1970s, and that probably does have at a subliminal level, it probably does have an influence over the thinking of some men, insofar as some men may feel it's not macho, or that there is something that maybe tells them that if they get into teaching, people might make assumptions about, their motivation or something of that sort, particularly in early years. And I agree with you. That is a wholly unhelpful line of thinking. The point that I was making earlier is there are things that we can control and there are things that we can't control. And within education and schools, the issue of wider society opinions is one that we can only from the outside observe. Whereas the issue, sorry, I'll just finish the point, Sargenda. I'll just finish the point.
Tajinda.
Of all people,
just let me finish the point, Sargenda. Whereas
stuff on the curriculum to indoctrinate them.
Whereas I'm not talking about anybody indoctrinating anybody. Whereas the issue of
Tajinda, can you just let it? We're getting too much.
There are things we can control and things we can't. But you can control it. If you can say to young children, this is how you have to have sex, right, on the RSE curriculum, which is what you do. You can turn around to those young boys and say, this is what will happen if you abandon your children. And yet you don't say it. You will not say it. You will not put it on that curriculum. So why not?
I've got no idea what avenue you're going down here, to Jim.
No, I'm going down the one that you can teach.
I think the topic is,
and we can teach things. Right?
I think the topic is
those things on purpose, because it does not suit you.
All right.
It's a luxury belief. It's a luxury belief that we can just have these single parent families and women can just do it all. And therefore, it'll be fine, right? We can just leave men to one side. They have no real purpose. And then what you do is sit there and go, oh, but we can't teach that. Why can't you teach it?
I think what Carl's saying, Tajinda,
I'm not talking about. Yeah, sorry, Dave.
We can teach things and we can talk about the curriculum, but we're really talking about whether it's going to solve anything to have more male teachers. And I'm guessing your answer is no, there's bigger issues.
So what's out of our control? Because nothing seems to be out of its control when it comes to the left. And when they want to indoctrinate, they can put everything on the curriculum that they wish, right? Nothing seems to be out of their control. It's only out of their control when they don't want to admit their own mistakes. Quite frankly, on this earth,
I could have a debate, Sargenda, with you.
Can't help it. It's wider society, and yet you can teach so many things on the curriculum, apparently, including adolescents, which I don't agree with.
Let's allow Lucy to come in. Our newcomer.
I think actually, I'm just going to go quickly to an ad read, and then I'm going to bring Lucy in and maybe think about some issues that could come up in terms of solutions. But so, hello everyone. So, Kialo. It's a BET award-winning Kialo Edu is 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussion. Students can instantly and simultaneously create an interactive map of a discussion, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kialo to make the world, not our world, a more thoughtful place. Join them today at kialoedu.com. And of course, John Catt. This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational Publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit John Catt Bookshop to explore the full range of titles. You can see the code coming on the screen now, but if you're listening, it's JCTTR2425. You get 20% off your order. So just returning, I guess my question, just to focus more on possible solutions I've read about. This one I think is controversial, but that's what we're here to talk about. Scholarships to encourage more men to go into primary and nursery teaching. Lucy, your thoughts on that?
Well, scholarships how? Because you study for your degree, you do your PGCE or teacher training, and then you become a teacher. So what will these scholarships be? Are these taking away the need for a degree? Are they funding people through university?
The idea would be you'd have, just like we have bursaries for maths, bursary for this, you'd have quite substantial bursaries for men only to get them into to look at university graduates to look at primary and early education.
I think the issue is that for a lot of people, it's a drive to teach in the first place, isn't it? And for a lot of people, the drive to teach is for secondary because they have a passion about a particular subject. In primary school, you're teaching everything and your responsibilities are very wide. It really concerns me about the role model issue because the expectation on teachers is to be everything, is to replace the family in so many ways and so many sectors, from cleaning children's teeth to being the perfect ideal of what an adult should look like, and that really concerns me. And I think when you're trying to incentivize people to go into a job that they might not have considered before, are they going to enjoy it? Is there a nature nurture question here where women are just more likely to want to work with younger children, to do those more, because it is more caring. I've worked in primary and secondary education, and a friend of mine wouldn't work with reception because they like to stroke your shoes, and she said, I just don't want that. So not everybody wants that kind of caring thing. I noticed it with the year 7s when they came up to secondary school, and I never thought they were needy when they were year 6, but when they're year 7 they're so needy all the time. And for a lot of people that doesn't appeal because they want to teach, they don't want to care, and there's a lot of caring involved in younger years. And I wonder whether some of that is some of the problem, and whether if you looked at things like pediatric nursing, for example, is that overrepresented by women as well? Is there just a nature, sort of a natural instinct that women are more likely to want to work with younger children and men with older children? I don't know.
Can I just ask you a question, Lucy?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't that have been the case as much in the 1970s?
Well, yeah, absolutely. But I think that those are those societal things. Men are so, why would you want to work with kids? What are you doing? Even just the judgment before you take into account any of the suspicions and those sort of pervasive societal concerns. Why would a bloke want to work in a nursery anyway? We know that people think like that. Not everybody does, and most people would welcome it. But those smallest voices, those minority voices, are the ones that you hear the most. And so I suspect that as we've grown in our ability to contact, in our platforms to be able to share our opinions and things, I would have thought that men are more insecure about going into those jobs unless it really is a driving passion. That's what I think.
Yeah, Tajinder, what are your thoughts?
I think that Lucy is right about this. And Carl, fair play, you made a valid point about why was it easier before than now. And the reason why it was easier before than now is because we didn't have this massive thing about safeguarding. And I don't think that safeguarding is a bad thing, but the suspicion that falls on men is not right. But it will not solve the problem. That's my point. It won't solve the problem because the problem comes from home.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts are, I think, getting to what Lucy said, I have grave concerns about this role model idea. It's something I've read a bit into, and there's a lot of debate on it, but most evidence seems to show it doesn't quite work that way. Obviously, having positive role models in your family, of course, but this idea that you can somehow, if you have more men in primary education, boys will see them as role models and become better boys or men. I just don't think there's the evidence to hold that up. I mean, it's an interesting idea.
Their heart is their own fathers, right?
Yeah.
So we're not talking about World War II, where your dad went off and like died in a war, and therefore you don't have your dad. We're talking about your dad is right there. Like, I remember one of the most heartbreaking things that I saw in a playground was a dad of one of the children in my class, and he had a new, so fine, like he wasn't with the mother anymore. But he was with like a new girlfriend. He went and picked those children up and didn't even say hello to his own children. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, he didn't even say hello to them. That was devastating for that child to just be walked past. Like that's his dad. Like, you should at least say hello to your own kids, right?
Yeah.
And he didn't. So I think you're right that we can't just go like plonk you in, you'll be a role model, and they will try their best and they will be something to those children. Don't get me wrong, they won't be nothing. They can't replace that relationship.
What are your thoughts, Carl?
I think, you're right, Dave. It's actually quite difficult to pin down with a convincing enough narrative that in and of itself, more men in education would automatically create more positive role models and therefore lead to fewer problems with the so-called crisis with boys. But what I do think we do need to go back to is that Bridget Phillipson in the speech was making the point that she felt there should be more men in teaching, and that over the last few years, I mean, I think the figure was quoted that there are 28,000 more teachers since 2010, but only 533 of them were men.
Yeah, now, which I was amazed by. Yeah.
That now, I mean, if you take the premise that other things being equal, it would be better if more men wanted to work in education and stay working in education, then you have to think as a policymaker, as a government, what are your main levers for doing that? And you gave an example, which is one of many, where it was cited that possible scholarships or bursaries to encourage men into teaching could be an idea. I'm not a huge fan of those sorts of things. Primarily, I think positive discrimination, which is sort of what it is or what it would be, only creates resentment, and all it would do is it would feed a perspective that men were opting to take the route of education, teach training simply to get the money, and that so I'm not sure, I'm not convinced by that. But what I am saying is that the unpalatable truth, the truth that no government wants to hear, because obviously they've got other economic priorities, is that if you constantly erode the real terms value of working in teaching internationally, this is PISA evidence, PISA evidence, internationally, you will get fewer men working in the profession. And therefore, if you genuinely want to actually increase the number of men who want to teach, and then it's up to men and women to compete, as Lucy said. I would hate to be in a situation where you actually favoured a man over a woman simply because you felt you had to employ a man. I think that would be wholly wrong. But I do think if you genuinely want more men to be competing against women in, terms of jobs in education, what you do is you restore the real terms value of pay in education.
But how much would that cost?
That's expensive, but that will have that effect. All the evidence internationally seems to suggest that would have that effect.
But the uplift would have to be so huge. It would have to be, you're not going to be incentivized by an extra £2,000 a year. So it's going to have to be an enormous amount of money. And that money isn't there. There are so many cost pressures on the government that to do a big uplift to make teaching more attractive, if that's what you're saying, actually, once you get into the job as well, you then see that for all the money in the world, there are lots of people who leave the profession regardless of the pay because they'd rather be paid less to do something different because of the work pressures within the job. So I'm not convinced by that.
Hi secondary school teachers, we're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculums. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org.
Did you know that every year, half of disadvantaged children who are top attainers at primary school don't go on to achieve top GCSE maths results? At Axiom Maths, we exist to change that. Our fully funded programme helps schools nurture young mathematicians through weekly face-to-face maths circles, where pupils tackle challenging and exciting problems outside the national curriculum. With just under £3,000 annual funding, expert training and quality resources, we give schools everything they need to inspire the next generation of mathematical thinkers. Want to make a difference? Visit axiommaths.com today and join over 400 schools delivering math circles across the UK.
Meet 2025 BET Award winner Kialo EDU, the 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussion. On Kialo, students contribute instantly and simultaneously to create an interactive map of a discussion, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. Set tasks, track participation, and provide personalized feedback in just a few clicks. And since it's compatible with all your favorite LMS platforms, it slots seamlessly into your existing workflow. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kialo to make the world a more thoughtful place. Join them today at kialo-edu.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out! Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading!
I think a huge uplift, I think Carl is talking about, and it's a dream. My other concern, we'll see what you guys think about this, is that this all does link back to Netflix and adolescence, in the sense that these issues have been around for a long time. I did my teaching degree in the 90s. There were debates about boys in school then. And suddenly with this show, and I'm saying it's good or bad, there's an incredible amount of attention. I do have concerns that attention can burn bright and then extinguish very quickly. And I just see it possibly as a government, everybody wants to do something, but no one quite knows what to do. It's an issue. Everybody's watching the show.
Dave, come on. They do know what to do. It's just they can't admit their own mistakes. They can't admit it. They can't admit they got family policy wrong for all these decades. And now it's coming back to roost, right? It really is. It's a total luxury belief that you cannot have a father in the family or a father involved in the family. And like I said, I'm not saying you must stick together because I can't say that. I've been divorced, right? But what I'm saying is the father should still be involved. And it's so easy for the fathers to either choose not to be involved or separately. And I've seen this too, for the system to be manipulated so the fathers are not involved. Because the mom just decides, no, we don't need that person, right? Right. So I've seen that with my own family, where it's like, well, I don't need that person. He can just stay out of those children's lives. Right? We need to think more carefully about how we involve fathers in the family in the first place, even if the family breaks down. Right, think about it. Right, what can we do? What can we do to incentivize it? What can we do to make it happen? And what can we do to make the situation better? Because the only way we're going to get around this is if those fathers actually spend time with those children. And I'm not saying all of them, because some of them will actually be bad people. I agree. I shouldn't be around them. But
Yeah.
that does not mean the majority of them are, but they're not taught this. And when they have children really young and they don't understand their responsibility, what do you expect? What do you
Yeah.
expect from
I mean,
young
I'm not disagreeing with that, and I think those are deeper societal issues that any government should be looking at. I guess I'll rephrase in the sense that, once again, yeah, I do sort of agree with you in that sense, Tajinder, that a government is running around, there's a lot of hype, what are you going to do? And these are easy solutions without any actual aspect that they've put in
Yeah.
place. I think what Carl and Lucy are saying is also right. They've said this is a possible solution. Will it happen? I don't know. How could you make it happen? No one knows. So that's my issue, is that when TV shows come along like this, it'll burn bright, and in 2 months' time, it'll fade. It'll be something else, and no one really deals with it.
But
That's
it
my
should
concern.
fade. It should fade because as adolescence is just a television program. And
Mm.
actually, one of the things that I noticed, so I have watched it all. I watched it because I was told I ought to watch it. So I thought, right, okay, I'll watch it. My daughter said it's brilliant. I didn't think it was that brilliant. It was a good program, but I don't think there's anything that can be gained from showing it in schools.
No,
And
I
actually,
agree.
one of my takeaways from it was the portrayal of women. There were 4 key women, really, that I could think of, or 5 if you include the victim. And they were either victims or, you know, the one girl who was the friend of the murdered girl was aggressive and angry. And actually, that, you know, there was a teacher who was quite drippy and ditzy, and the mother and the daughter were very sort of shied into sort of fear from, you know, upsetting the father. And actually, the portrayal of women in that program alone, other than the psychologist, was really quite poor. Or not poor, but it, you know, it's subjugated women in a way that I didn't particularly like anyway. So for me, I don't think that that's the key. And I think that adolescence shouldn't become part of the curriculum, something
No.
that's talked about, or something that leads policy or ideas.
No, and I always worry, if you're making policy, doesn't matter what government, what side of politics, I think any government is trying to make policy on the hoof based on the hype around a TV show is
Yeah.
that cannot be.
I mean,
good.
if I can just leap in, if I may, because I've seen it too. I mean, as a piece of drama, leave aside the whether you think it's an accurate or fair portrayal of social issues. As a piece of drama, I did think it was actually outstanding myself, and I think that's partly why there's been so much attention, because many people were drawn into watching what was some compelling performances, some absolutely top-notch production, and some really innovative ways of shooting the action. There was a lot of stuff going on around, you know, following people continuously through corridors and things of that sort. I think the second reason why it's attracted so much attention is because it resonates with something that's already perceived to be there. This isn't come out the blue. People have been talking for quite some time now about the concerns they have about the attitudes being displayed by adolescent boys, particularly in their secondary age years, and anybody that's worked in secondary education over a significant period of time will have seen and noticed a shift in views amongst those teenage boys. Not to romanticize their views before that, but there has been a shift to a particular type of viewpoint, whether it's
But Carl, sorry, part of the problem is that, sorry, and I'm going to have to like go to an ad break in a second because apparently it amuses Tom that I will say it in my voice. But part of the problem is that we are saying what is like normal banter has turned into toxic masculinity, right? That can't happen. I do want you to speak on this. We can only have like maybe a minute or two, and then I'll go into the ad break.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. I think partly there is, you know, a difference in the experience of adolescent boys to maybe 30, 40 years ago. And that's not to say that society has always struggled with adolescent boys in one form or another for forever. But at the moment, the particular shift is that they are more exposed to much more extreme and ubiquitous access to pornography than they did 30, 40 years ago. They are looking around them and picking up cues and signals about what society says about them in ways that perhaps they didn't quite so acutely maybe 30, 40 years ago. And then of course you throw into the mix the whole influence of the internet, conspiracy theories, social influencers on social media sites and so forth. And what that does is it creates a particular public discourse which boys reflect. And I think that's what we're seeing in schools. And it is a concern. It isn't healthy. It isn't positive. It isn't good for boys, and it isn't good for anybody else either. And I think that's why the show has resonated. And I don't think the government would make schools, show it. I think that's just a. But what I do think is that.
No, I don't agree with that, Tajid. I think it's newspaper hype. I agree with Carl. I don't think anybody seriously in 2 weeks is going to remember that it should be shown in schools. I just don't believe that'll ever happen. Should we go to an ad? We better move on to our next topic, Tajid. Do you want to do the ad read?
Sure. Kialo Edu, best awarded, and honestly, Tom, I can't believe you're making me do this. My best award-winning Kialo Edu is 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussion. Students can instantly and simultaneously create an interactive map of a discussion, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kialo to make the world a more thoughtful place. Join them today at Kialo scoreedu.com. John Cat. This show is brought to you in partnership with John Cat Educational Publishers of professional development books and resources that supports great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit johncatbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTTR2425 for 20% off your order.
Fantastic, Tajinda. So this one is an interesting one, a Tajinda selection. So teacher union report surge, and that again in inverted commas, in concerns about redundancies. The NASUWT leader, Dr. Patrick Roach, has reported a surge, again in inverted commas, in requests for support from members facing redundancies, warning funding cuts will prompt more industrial action ballots in individual schools and trusts. He said the union would wait, though, to see the government's response to the school teachers review body recommendation before making a decision on whether to ballot its members for potential national strikes. And schools are being asked to save up to £750,000 through redundancies, as revealed by Schools Week last week, as curriculum squeezes and cuts to programs supporting the poorest pupils as the funding crisis escalates. So, Tajinda, why did this one take your interest so much?
Oh, it took my interest because I actually support the unions on this one for once.
Okay.
I actually look. The union's doing its
Carl's
actual
always falling
job.
off his chair.
I've just fallen off my
The
chair.
union doing its actual
didn't
job.
expect
Sorry.
I said Carl almost fell off his chair when you said that.
Yeah.
Right. Well, the union's doing its actual job for once, right? And its actual job is not to do whatever it feels like or politicize stuff. It's its job to actually maintain the concerns of its members. And Patrick Roach is completely right. If these rises in pay come from unfunded sources, they have to come from the schools or the trusts themselves, that actually will cause redundancies. So actually we need to be responsible. Do you want the pay rise, or do you want people? Do you actually want people in schools? Because you need to think about this now, because you won't get people in schools unless you actually allow them to be paid properly. And you can't support the existing people in those schools by just having these unfunded raises, because if you pay a teacher 2.8% more, fine, but they can't do without their TA, right? They can't do without the people that are supposed to support them for that one-to-one. So where's that going to come from?
Carl?
Yeah, so the reality is that we have now a point in the year when school leaders will very much be scoping their budgets for next year and the next 2 years, and in doing so making their curriculum plans and deciding therefore what number of teachers and staff they can afford overall. And they've been hit by two things. One we know, one we're not sure about. One is that the national insurance increase, the amount that employers pay in national insurance, the increase that was introduced in April, was underfunded. The government said that they were fully funding it. No doubt at a national level, at a sort of macro level, that may be true. But at a school level, on average, about 35% underfunding per school has taken place for the national insurance increase. So in a typical school of secondary school, say of about 1,000 pupils, that means that there'll be a shortfall of approximately £50,000 that has to be found from somewhere. So that's already going into the pot in thinking, and therefore, and I absolutely know that schools everywhere at the moment are having to consider redundancies. That's a reality, and they have to consider them soon because they have to make those decisions well before they get into the summer holiday. So, that's going to happen to. Now, then the speculation about the pay increase, which at the moment is still speculation. The government were planning to issue their report last week, but for some reason they've decided to delay that a few weeks, so we don't yet know. But if the speculation is correct, and they do recommend something in the region of 2.8%, and then they say that the funding for that is only going to be about 1.3%, then that will about halve again the amount of money that schools think they have, wriggle room available, the headroom, as it were. And that will mean that it will only add fuel to the redundancy, prospect of redundancy. So redundancies will happen. There is a reason, though, if I may add, why government is looking at the big picture and is thinking we need fewer teachers, oddly. And that's because pupil numbers in primary school peaked in 2019. In secondary school, pupil numbers are still rising, but they'll peak by 2027. So in the government's view, the actual overall amount of funding for education should in fact drop. But that doesn't mean that the per head funding should drop. And at the moment, we're facing the potential for quite a serious situation unless there's some, renegotiation.
What are your thoughts, Lucy?
Well, I mean, you're right about pupil numbers falling. That has been known about for quite some time, and yet in their manifesto, Labour had spoken about the need to increase teacher numbers, and I think it was about 6,500 extra teachers that they wanted to recruit. So they've come in off the back of that and are now looking at saying, well, actually pupil numbers are falling, but this has not been a mystery. This has been something that's been known about for years. So I'm a bit surprised by that. But we also have to think about the complexity of need in schools now. Things have changed. We have so many more identified special needs, so much extra support needed in classrooms. And of course, the first place where the cuts are made is in that support. And like Tarjinder said, the idea that you can go back to a situation where you teach without teaching assistants in a school, for example, like they used to when I was at school in the 80s, is for the birds, because there are so many needs and we are so much more, with less, we have more understanding about the conditions such as ADHD and things, and those children no longer get wrapped over the knuckles. They get given extra time, they get taken out to, extra classrooms and things like that. And so that money still needs to be there. I don't think the fall in pupil numbers will be comparable to the rise in spending need in the future. So that would be my opinion. I was an HLTA, and I was really worried about having to break the news that I was leaving because, we were a really good department and I felt really bad about it. But then we were told they'd need to make a redundancy. So I announced my departure as a hope of offsetting a redundancy instead, which it did, but that was only temporary. And my colleagues now in the maths department, are having to cover other teaching areas. So they're having to teach business, computing, sciences and things like that. So those problems, those redundancies will come with a reduced positive effect for children where they have different teachers teaching bits of this and bits of that. It's going to be hugely problematic, I think.
Can I just say something? So I had this realization a couple of weeks ago, which is I believed that we would have these COVID, the lockdown children, and they would come into school and then we would somehow catch it up and make it up, and it'd be fine. It'd be a one-off thing, right? Speech and language, maybe additional special needs. But then it hit me that actually that's not going to be right, because the way that they've been parented is the way they've been parented, and those parents are going to parent the next lot of kids they have the same way. So we're going to have multiple iterations of this now for a while. So if you're brought up in front of a screen, you can't feed yourself at 4 years old, which there are children who cannot do that, then we're going to have another iteration in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, and whatever, right? So what Lucy's saying about the level of needs is not wrong at all. The level of needs would still be there, because if you did not teach your children how to speak properly, well, you're not going to teach the second one any better, right? It's just not going to happen. And so we're going to still be stuck with those needs. So how are we going to meet them?
Yeah, I saw one of the comments from one of our listeners saying education is no longer a priority. I just want to pick up on that. I sort of disagree. I'm not saying no way am I arguing that.
Come on, it's not. It's not a priority because Bridget Phillipson does not care about education. Okay. She cares about her job of being a leader, is what she cares about. Let's be real here, right?
We've gone through this debate many times, and I know I'm not totally disagreeing with you, but I just say I can't comment on stuff I don't know Bridget Phillipson.
ASCL wrote that schools bill, right? It's open secret. So the fact that she couldn't even be bothered to write that bill and actually pay attention to it shows you everything. So there is a truth in the fact that it is falling lower in the government priorities, because the government, even if the education secretary does not prioritize her own, job, then what is there? If she thinks there's something better I can go for in 2 years' time, and that's what she's prioritizing, then of course it's not going to be prioritized.
I think, I'm going to disagree. I'm not going to talk about Bridget Phillipson, and I'm not going to get into this idea again. But I do think they're just buffeted by so many things. A contrast.
They're buffeted by so many things.
I know, but what I'm saying is there is no. I'm not defending them. Let me finish my thought.
Why are you giving them special license to be a poor government, right?
No, I'm not saying that.
You wouldn't say it to the Liberal Democrats, and yet here you are, Labour Party. Oh, poor them. No, not poor them. Sort it out. It's your job.
Never saying,
it's your job.
I'm not disagreeing with that, and I'm not actually disagreeing with you. I'm saying, because buffet is not the right word. There's too many contrasting priorities that they can't get straight without enough money. It just came back to me when Lucy was saying about SEND. SEND is in crisis. The government published a white paper saying that schools need billions of pounds for that. Now they're talking, that goes along with 6,500 new teachers. Now, over the course of Parliament, when I think the first promise was per year, and they've realised that can't happen. But we've also got an economic situation that's difficult, across the world.
Which they've created in the first place.
And there's just so many issues.
Policies.
Yeah, look, my point isn't
own policies, right? So if you're going to create a stupid situation where we can't have money, where our millionaires are leaving the country, where our young people who've got any kind of any entrepreneurship are leaving the country because they don't believe they belong here anymore. But if you create the situation where that happens, you can't then be like, poor me. It's your job to have not done that, and yet you've done it. That's what's happening. We can't be a more productive economy because of the policies they're putting in place in the first place.
Absolutely. And we can grow the pool of money. We could, that there is the opportunity to grow the amount of money available to cover all of the needs and to grow with the needs of the population. And that is definitely not going to happen. And we know that it took a hit before, and we understand that. But it's not going to happen now because of choices that have been made. And I think that's really unfortunate. And it will be children who pay the biggest price for that.
Yeah, I'm totally in agreement. Carl, what are your thoughts?
Dave, you're absolutely right. Education policy, not just now, but over decades and decades, really, since there has been an education policy, so we're going back to the late 19th century, has been something of a kite in the wind. It blows all over the place, because education is a long-term investment with unclear benefits in the short term. And politics and the business of government is often related to the political cycle, which is 5 years, and the need for managing things over much shorter periods of time. Unfortunately, events always happen. This week, we've got the issues that have surrounded the whole, crashing of the world economy by Trump. But then if you go back a couple of years, you're looking at the issue with the war in Ukraine. If you go back a couple of years before that, you get into COVID. If you go back 4 or 5 years before that, you get into a long period of severe austerity that followed the financial crash of 2008. The benign periods, when there aren't big challenges going on, are relatively short. The periods when there are big economic challenges going on are relatively long. So historically, education always gets put to the back of the queue, or leastways it gets put down the queue, because those things happen a lot and governments have to deal with them a lot. The problem is that in the long run, education consistently gets underfunded, and then in the long run, society literally becomes less skilled and less productive. So it's balancing long-term and short-term concerns, and that's a problem that governments have to face. But I'm afraid that the British government, and in fact, the American government too, over the last sort of 4 or 5 decades particularly, have been particularly poor at prioritizing longer term decision making, which is what actually business want, and not being buffeted around by short term thinking and the need for short term quick wins.
You are avoiding an issue, which is that left wing governments in this country have produced worse education policies going. They've produced it repeatedly, and they're producing it again.
That's your issue. That's not the issue with.
They choose to do that, and the only time
that's you can your issue, Tajinder. That's not the one that we're discussing.
Yeah, but that's not the point, is it?
I know that's what you want to say, but that's not the issue we're discussing. That's all I'm saying.
But it relates to it because you're talking about policy and how policy can be made.
I think you look at everything in this through the same prism, Tajinder.
You support a party that is rubbish at producing education policy, right, repeatedly. And also,
I don't think anybody's in doubt, Tajinder, about which. I don't think anybody's in doubt about which party you support, but that isn't the issue. That isn't the issue we're discussing here. We're not discussing which party you support. We're discussing what to do about the current redundancy problem.
It does matter, actually, because if you repeatedly support a party that has rubbished education over and over and over again, then you're going to have to take responsibility for the fact that it's happening again. You're going to have to take some responsibility at some point. Like I said, one of the reasons why I, as someone who grew up as a left-wing person, left the left wing as far as I'm concerned, is they've got no conscience. They've got no ability to admit their own mistakes. They keep repeating those mistakes over and over again. Why do we have these economic issues now? Right, it's not just Trump, thank you. It's other things too.
Tajinder, we get it. We get it.
I think we're getting excited. I don't want us to become debating economic issues on the world scale, Tajinder.
They put things in place that we knew would mean less entrepreneurship, less economic growth, less growth of the economy, right? So you can't just go ahead and do that and say, oh, well,
I could have a discussion with you about economics. I could have a discussion with you about economics, Tajinder, and I could talk about the last 15 years of government if you like. But I would, if I were you, focus on the issue that we've got, which is right now. What do we do with the question of redundancies? That's what we're trying to kind of bottom out.
Because that's a patronising comment.
I can discuss that with you, but I'm not going to discuss it with you because that's not the issue we're debating today.
No, is the issue, is part of the issue, right? So the fact that these redundancies are going to happen is because of unfunded rises for schools. Why are they unfunded? Where is the money going to come from? It can't come from anywhere because they've screwed up the economy. Thank you.
Well,
so I could talk to you about
screwing up the economy is a bit of a grand term. I don't think this government was responsible for the decision of Donald Trump or the Ukrainian war, or a number of other things that have happened in the last 2 years, but we'll leave that out of it because
that's basically reducing and basically making it so.
Carl's gone.
No.
Oh, he's
Right.
back.
But it is responsible, Carl, for the fact that it came in with net zero policies, which were going to always screw over this economy, right?
I don't think we should be litigating. I know what you're saying, Tajinder. I know you feel very deeply about it, and I have no arguments with that. And it's
Sorry,
something
I
you're
think I
clearly
lost
very
my
passionate on.
connection.
However, I'd like to just refocus us back onto the redundancies, and just look at this for the last bit of time we have. You know, in terms of the redundancies that we all
I
seem to
can't
be
hear
agreeing
anybody,
that
I'm
are
afraid.
unavoidable at this stage.
Oh.
But
Sorry, Carl can't hear us.
where do we see them hitting the most? My issue would be that, you know, I know at my daughter's school, the subjects that are gone tend to be ones that are seen as somewhat, what would you call it? I'm trying to think of the right name, but seen as luxury subjects. So German and Italian are gone, you know, just completely cut. So it's tending to, oh, Carl has, the things just crashed. They're tending to focus with, I do feel for, not going to say the government, I feel for principals, and I wouldn't want to be a principal who are being forced to make incredibly difficult decisions that are highly unpopular with staff. Of course, no one likes redundancies, and having to choose where to make them. And they seem to come down, in my experience, on those subjects that are seen as somewhat that you could almost do without them. I mean, who cares if they don't have Italian? We can cut German. That's the bit that I see as very sad. Lucy, what are your thoughts? What are you seeing?
Well, I agree with you. I mean, you know, I've seen my daughter's just about to leave school, finishing A levels. But, you know, I spoke to a friend the other day who said that her daughter has got to go to a school, you know, a bus ride away, £1,000 a year, because the school near us is having to cut subjects again, is having to mix the blocks that the A level subjects are going into. And I presume that that would be down to those kinds of cuts. And unfortunately, that seems to be happening everywhere. And again, like I said, at the end of the day, the purpose of education is so that children have a broad scope of understanding of all different subjects. They have the opportunity to try different things, to learn about what they like and what they don't like. You know, languages, as far as I'm concerned, I could never speak a single language. I was useless. But I believe that everybody has a right to be able to learn those. And like you said, they seem to be, it's languages, it's the arts and things that are more cuttable, because you know, those, the maths and English, those core subjects underpin everything else, and it's right that they're protected. But by narrowing the curriculum like this, children will not have the opportunity to enjoy that broad range of experiences, and that's a huge concern. And of course, what we'll end up with is a lack of experience in those subjects. You're not going to have people training as music teachers, etc., because there's such a small need for them. So there should be more forward thinking, and I agree with Carl that sometimes it's very short-term thinking, and sometimes, you know, the government's come in and instead of just letting things run for a bit and seeing how things are going, we've got to make these changes, and at a time where there's financial changes and all of those things, it's all turned into a merry mix of misery, effectively, and it's the children that are affected.
Where are you seeing it, Tajinder? I know you teach at lower years. Where are the cuts coming there?
Well, right now I'm not seeing it, if I'm honest. But I think what will happen is we'll have to put up with less supply. So if people are off sick, we won't have anybody there to actually cover them. I think that's what they're like. I think that's what will happen. I think we'll have to try and cover more ourselves as best as we can. But that means that there will not be that consistent provision for those children who are the most disadvantaged and who have the most need.
What about you, Carl? What are you seeing?
Well, as a school principal, I have to make these decisions, and what you do a typical cycle. So in your kind of late autumn, you're starting to get some information about how many pupils you expect to come through. You're starting to get a little bit of a sense of, therefore, what your curriculum need will be. And then sometime in the spring, you get information about what to base your budget on, based on what noises you're getting from government about funding and wage increases and so on. Although the more information you get earlier, the better. And consequently, then, we're right now in the middle of this and having to make these calculations. And there is absolutely no doubt whatsoever that nearly all secondary school, and I'm sure primary too, but nearly all school leaders are having to face the reality that next year they will be looking at an in-year deficit. I would say probably about 3/4 to maybe 80% are facing the reality of an in-year deficit next year. Now, what they're then doing is they're using up reserves. Now, schools had accumulated a degree of
Sorry,
reserves.
Carl, it's just that you've
Hang
only
on,
got
just let me finish.
1 minute.
Just let me finish. Just let me finish for a minute, please. So
No, but it's just that you've only got 1 minute, basically. That's
No,
fine.
Okay, all right, sorry, yeah, okay. They've got a degree of reserves which they're drawing on, which means that next year there'll be some redundancies, but there won't be a huge number. But the following year, because you're always funded on a lagged basis, so for the numbers that you had the year before, the following year there's a good chance that unless something else changed, the situation will become really serious.
Yeah, and my final thing is, once those subjects go, in my experience where I work, we've cut history of art, we've cut classics, Italian. They don't come back. You know, that's the tragedy I see. No one has ever, there's no discussion, nor would there would be in this current climate of, well, one day those subjects will come back. I've found in my experience, once they're gone, they're gone. And, you know, and I just see it as, a really bad situation on a happy note to a Sunday morning.
Before I say no, thank you, Dave. I suppose we're going to have to end this particular show. Thank you to everybody for coming and for speaking and contributing.
Fantastic. See you later, everybody.
Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Hi, secondary school teachers. We're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculums. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org.
Did you know that every year, half of disadvantaged children who are top attainers at primary school don't go on to achieve top GCSE maths results? At Axiom Maths, we exist to change that. Our fully funded program helps schools nurture young mathematicians through weekly face-to-face maths circles, where pupils tackle challenging and exciting problems outside the national curriculum. With just under £3,000 annual funding, expert training and quality resources, we give schools everything they need to inspire the next generation of mathematical thinkers. Want to make a difference? Visit axiommaths.com today and join over 400 schools delivering maths circles across the UK.
Meet 2025 BET Award winner Kialo EDU, the 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussion. On Kialo, students contribute instantly and simultaneously to create an interactive map of a discussion, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. Set tasks, track participation, and provide personalized feedback in just a few clicks. And since it's compatible with all your favorite LMS platforms, it slots seamlessly into your existing workflow. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kialo to make the world a more thoughtful place. Join them today at kialo-edu.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out! Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading!
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.